So thank you very much for the opportunity. And I guess that all of you know where it all started. Can I have the slides on? And back in 2019, we were struck by a lot of reports in the media on the lack of green credentials, to our surprise, for wind energy. And we were quite set aback on the, at that time, probably the very little focus that our industry was putting in the media for portraying our green credentials, and particularly with circularity. So we were looking at headlines that probably you saw in particularly United States media, stating how wind turbines cannot be recycled at all. Obviously, we in industry, and many of you who are very much involved in the sector know that 85 to 90% of the wind turbines can be recycled. It's a very well-established value chain for the great majority of the materials that we have in the wind turbines. But indeed, we do have a big issue in the recycling of composites, which are by far more difficult. And these materials are used particularly in the rotor blades. So when we were looking at this, we were wondering what's the state of play in Europe, where the issue lies, and how much waste we are talking about. So we start looking at the numbers. We try to give some clarity into the issue so that we were able to target it much better. I need to point that way for the next slide. Okay, previous. So where is the waste coming from in Europe? What is the amount of waste that we will be producing? And is this really a big problem that we have today? Are we going to have it within the next 5, within the next 10, within the next 20 years? Those were the initial questions that in WindEurope we started to look at. And with very basic tools, to be honest, we tried to devise a small model so that we are able to answer concerns from industry players, policymakers, and the society in general. So obviously, we need to look at the pioneers of wind energy in Europe to try to look at where the first wind turbines will be decommissioned. So when you look at the age of the wind fleet across different countries, well, you can clearly distinguish that there are turbines that are reaching, obviously, their end of life in the next coming years. So we try to divide that and try to estimate what will be the amount of wind turbines that will be reaching their end of life. So we came up with a counting of around 34,000 wind turbines in Europe that are 15 years or older. And these represent a cumulative capacity of 36 gigawatts divided in the 7 countries that you can see here, which actually represents 70% of the total volume of wind turbines that will be reaching that end of life. The next question is, well, how many of them actually are going to be disposed, decommissioned? How many of them actually they could get repowered? And then with some assumptions that we validate with our members, we try to look at that after 20 years, there is about 20% of wind turbines that will be either fully decommissioned or that will be going through repowering. Then after 25 years, obviously the amount of decommissioning will increase. The deterioration of materials is higher, and probably the capacity that will be fully decommissioned is by far more, and repowering far less. When you get to 30 years, we assume, and this is a purely assumption, everything will be decommissioned. And we came up with a figure of 52,000 tons per year of composite waste will be coming out every year by 2030. And to put this in context, I will talk a little bit more about what does that mean in terms of the handling of that amount of material. But before that, I have to say that we have some, sorry, I'm missing one slide here, but it's fine. One important aspect is that obviously as turbines are progressing, they are growing in size. So many of the turbines that actually were built in the past and then now reaching their end of life may had shorter blades than the ones that we are installing today. The rotor mass is probably less than what we are talking about. So all these factors come into play when we are trying to estimate the amount of waste. What was very interesting in our findings is that the ratio between power and the rotor mass of turbines throughout the last 10 to 15 years hasn't changed dramatically, which means in numbers that there is about 9 tons of composite per each megawatt that we are installing. So that ratio is quite stable over the last years, which allows us to make some assumptions and some calculations. And that's why we got to this graph here. Now, what happens today with the blades? And this is the topic of today. The industry puts a lot of emphasis on the EU hierarchy for waste management. We prioritize the reuse of the wind turbines, as I said, by repowering, extending the life of wind turbines. When it comes to repurposing, we see some examples out there of using blades for different other activities. So you see the playgrounds, you see the conceptual designs of bridges, also for urban furniture, and for putting some sheds for bicycles. Repurposing is a very important aspect, obviously, in the hierarchy of the EU waste management. But what we were looking at here is probably the uses that we will be doing on repurposing will be quite limited for the volumes that we are expecting in the future. So what we would like to discuss more in depth is, okay, what's happening with reuse and what can happen in the lower parts of the hierarchy, which is recycling and recovery. So obviously there are technologies for recycling and obviously for recovering, but they depend pretty much on a set of factors that are very important. On the one hand side is the process cost of the technology, and the other is the maturity of the technologies, the TRL level. If you want to add even environmental performance, could be another one, but this very simple chart shows you more or less where the technologies stay today. And depending on the technologies that we will be using, it will be also an important aspect of the value of the material at the end of the process. So we are looking into a very complex matrix of indicators that are important to be considered. And the message here is there are options available today that are mature, that are low cost, but probably that they are not scaled up enough. And this is the case of co-processing and mechanical grinding. Okay. So when it comes to recycling, which is obviously the end goal of circularity, we know that there will be some uses out there for the use of the material at the end of the recycling process, because recycling is not only treating the material, is not only being able to put it in smaller pieces, but also converting it into a product that is marketable, that is useful, and that has a value. And normally that value we understand is not as high as the value of the original product in which the virgin material was used. So here is a challenge. Where can we use this material in a way that the value is also not that different from the original use of material? And here we see some examples, some of them that you may know very well. So we have the examples of here provided by Tegnalia as precast concrete and noise barriers, which are very interesting when you think about that in the construction industry. So what happens if we don't use any of the previous options? And this is where disposal is an option. And at the moment, disposal is forbidden. There is a ban of landfilling wind blades in 4 European countries, highlighted here. In the Netherlands, our host country, Germany, Austria, and Finland, you cannot send the composite material to landfills. So what will it take for tackling all the previous issues that I mentioned in terms of cost, environmental performance, uptake, value of the substrate at the end of the recycling process? Well, we think that having a wider application of a ban for landfill would be an initial step to encourage and incentivize market players into tackling many of these issues. So we issued 2 months ago, a paper where we are calling the European Commission to enable a European landfill ban of decommissioned blades by 2025. So this is the commitment of the wind industry to ensure that there is solutions and that we are making a call for a rallying call for making this to happen. So that means that we are committing to reuse, recycle, or recover 100% of our wind blades by 2025. And we are proposing 4 pillars of action. Number 1, I mentioned we need to increase the level of maturity of technology, so increasing the funding towards the scale-up of all these recycling technologies is extremely important. Number 2, it is also important to incentivize the use of the recycled material. Waste managers, waste management companies, and those ones that will make a business, they cannot actually invest in if there is no a market for that recycled material. It's not only about the technologies to recycle, but also is increasing the funding in the research and innovation for the development of new materials that actually are easier to recycle. And we will hear a lot about this from many of the manufacturers. Also is establishing a cross-sectorial platform, because composite waste is not an issue of only wind turbines. It is a cross-sectoral challenge. And we are calling other sectors to contribute towards this effort and make sure that we are working together towards make enough volumes of waste streams so that the business case for recycling becomes viable and becomes investable. The absolute values of this chart obviously are always a question mark, but the key message here is that wind turbine waste is a minimum part of what is today composite material. What we estimate, actually what the European Composite Association estimates, is that by 2025, wind turbine blade waste would equivalent to about 5% of the entire composite material waste in Europe from all these sectors. Wind turbines will represent about 5%. Okay? Obviously, this is about to increase because if we are doing the transition towards energy, but we think that by 2030, the maximum waste share of our industry amongst all the composite waste will be about 10%. Okay, so it is indeed a cross-sector challenge. And with that message, I would like to end my presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ivan, for a very good presentation and indeed a very good introduction to the topic. Are there any questions in the room or in the chat? I have not seen any so far. Okay. Okay, Peter?
So thank you very much for this presentation, and I think it is a very challenging statement also to call for this landfill ban by 2025. And but at the same time, there's also a lot of blades popping up. So I know they have been processed in, for example, cement and so on. What do you see will be the main flows and directions where the blade material will be processed to?
I think in the short term, you mentioned recovery is probably the most advanced option that we have today. We understand there is a co-processing facility in Germany that is able to get enough volumes for today's composite waste. It can process about 30,000 tons per year of composite material. So as I said, that could take us probably up to 2025 if you saw the chart, but happy to share it afterwards. To give you a bit of context, that's only one factory in Germany. Obviously, if you have turbines, spread across Europe, it's going to be very difficult to send all your turbines to Germany to be co-processed and to be done in recovery. But anecdotally, we know when we made the estimation that, for example, Lafarge-Holcim, which is the second largest, or probably the first largest cement producer in the world, in Europe has a capacity of 1 million tons of cement co-processing. So with only one factory, we are able to get this done by 2025. We are calling to ensure that there are more co-processing available. And that doesn't mean that we are going to send every single blade to a cement co-processing facility. We really need to look at other options that are not only more environmentally friendly, but also that are providing enough business case and cost effectiveness for the wind industry.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions or in the chat? Okay. I have two myself. So right now, if I want to get rid of a blade in Germany, all I need to do is transport it over the border to a country where landfill is still allowed. It's maybe not the ideal option, but it's there. Yeah,
that's correct. And this is what is the most important aspect, to have this ban across the EU. Because also we will be committing, as part of that, not to send decommissioned blades to third countries outside Europe. So it's part of the commitment. So it's not only, okay, let's just make it tight in the EU, and then we can, set aside our turbines to be exported somewhere else. So we hope that also that sets an example to third countries, so that the regulation also is in that direction.
Okay, thanks. And the second thing that I noticed, and that, well, before this meeting, because it was in the ETIP as well, but is that the industry is pushing for harder measures against landfill and for more recyclability options. Like typically, you have to drag that to something like that, which costs money, screaming and kicking. And here they are actually taking the initiative. How come?
We know that that composite waste is non-toxic. Okay, so by putting it in a landfill, it is not causing a pollution from the chemical decomposition of it, but it is against the principles of wasting valuable resources that can be used. And that's against what the wind industry wants to do. We want to really take the leadership in the transition, not only of energy, but also to sustainability and circularity. So it is responding to also that principle of doing the right thing.
Okay. Yeah, one more question for Martijn.
Thank you for the presentation. Martijn van Roemen from TNO. Do you believe it will ever become profitable or attractive to dig up everything that has been buried already?
This is a very good question. What we are looking at is to stop now what it could come the biggest volumes that we are going to see. I think at the moment what we have already, landfill has very little chances of being dug up and taken to recycle, but we have always been wrong when we do estimations about technology development in the wind industry. So I wouldn't discard it completely. I wouldn't rule it out completely.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ivan. Thanks again for the questions, and I hope.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.